The drive home felt like a victory lap. The teaching conference had been everything I'd hoped for. Engaging workshops, practical strategies, and moments of camaraderie with other educators who shared my passion for history. I couldn't wait to bring what I'd learned back to my students, to help them see the stories of the past as more than dates and battles. As I turned onto our quiet suburban street, the golden hues of the late afternoon sun made everything feel warm and inviting. My heart lifted at the thought of surprising Emily and Jake with an impromptu family outing. Maybe ice cream and a visit to the park, they loved that. When I pulled into the driveway, I spotted the curtains shift in the living room window. A smile spread across my face. Emily must have seen me pull up. She always had a knack for sensing when I was home early. But as I stepped out of the car and approached the door, something stopped me cold. The faint sound of Sophia's voice carried through the partially open window. Her tone was low, deliberate, the kind she used when she didn't want to be overheard. At first, I thought she might be on a work call, but then I caught a name that made my chest tighten. Dylan. I froze, straining to hear. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine," she said, her words cutting through the hum of my thoughts. "Ethan doesn't understand me, Dylan. He never has. You make me feel alive." The air seemed to thicken around me. My hand gripped the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. "I just need to figure out the right time," she continued. "Leaving Ethan won't be easy. He's dependable, but that's all he is. He's a roadblock, Dylan. An obstacle to what we could have." Her words hit like a freight train, each one driving deeper into my chest. I stepped back, my body moving on instinct, my mind struggling to keep up. Back in the car, I sat in stunned silence, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My house, our home, loomed large in the rearview mirror, its cheerful facade now a cruel mockery of the life I thought we'd built. Sophia, my wife, the woman I'd shared dreams, struggles, and nearly a decade of marriage with, was planning to leave me. For Dylan Cooper, a man I barely knew, someone who'd apparently wormed his way into her heart while I was too busy being dependable. I drove aimlessly at first, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of disbelief, anger, and hurt. How long had this been going on? Was I really just an obstacle in her eyes? Eventually, I found myself at the park, the same one I'd been planning to take the kids to. I parked near the pond and sat there, staring at the rippling water, as the enormity of the situation sank in. The shock gave way to something else, clarity. This wasn't just about me. It was about Emily and Jake. They deserved stability, love, and a home that didn't crumble under the weight of deceit. If Sophia was intent on leaving, I couldn't stop her, but I wasn't going to let her take everything. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, pausing at Olivia Blake's name. She was a lawyer my friend Matt had recommended a few months ago when his own divorce got messy. "She's sharp, Ethan," he'd said. "If things ever go south, call her." At the time, I'd laughed it off. Sophia and I had our ups and downs, sure, but divorce? That had seemed unimaginable. Now it was my reality. I tapped her number and waited as the phone rang. Olivia Blake speaking. Came the crisp, professional voice on the other end. "Ms. Blake," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "My name is Ethan Parker. I was referred to you by Matt Taylor. I think I need your help." Her tone softened slightly. "Of course, Mr. Parker. Why don't you tell me a little about what's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The overheard conversation, the betrayal, the fears swirling in my head. She listened patiently, her occasional hums of acknowledgement the only interruptions. When I finished, she said, "You did the right thing by reaching out. It's clear you want to protect your kids and yourself, and that's a good place to start. Let's set up a meeting to go over your options." Hearing her calm, confident voice steadied me. "Thank you," I said. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep my family intact. We'll figure this out," she assured me. "You're not alone in this, Ethan." As I ended the call, a sense of resolve settled over me. Sophia's betrayal hurt more than words could describe, but I wasn't going to let it define me or destroy my family. I'd given my all to our marriage, and now I would give my all to protecting what truly mattered. Emily and Jake. I took one last look at the pond before starting the car. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The smell of baked ziti filled the house as I stepped through the front door that evening, the soft hum of life in our home masking the storm raging inside me. "Dad!" Emily squealed, running up to wrap her arms around my waist. Jake followed close behind, brandishing a drawing of a rocket he'd been working on all afternoon. "Whoa, that's amazing, Jake," I said, kneeling to his level. "You're going to be an engineer someday." Emily tugged at my sleeve. "What about me?" "An artist, of course," I replied, ruffling her hair. "And a great one, too." It was moments like these that reminded me why I had to keep my composure. My kids didn't deserve the fallout of Sophia's betrayal. At dinner, I played my part. Sophia passed me the salad bowl with a practiced smile, her tone casual as she recounted her day at work. I nodded and asked questions, careful not to let my voice betray the anger and disbelief simmering beneath the surface. To anyone watching, we were just another suburban family sharing a meal. But I could feel the distance between us, the unspoken truths thickening the air. Late that night, when the house had gone quiet, I got to work. I retrieved a box from the garage labeled holiday lights and opened it to reveal a small set of discrete cameras I'd purchased during a Black Friday sale last year. At the time, I thought they might be useful for keeping an eye on the kids while I worked late. Now, they had a very different purpose. I installed the first camera in the living room, carefully positioning it behind a decorative vase. The second went in the kitchen, tucked neatly behind a stack of cookbooks. I hesitated before setting up the third in our bedroom. It felt invasive, but I needed answers, and this was the only way to get them. Finally, I logged into our joint bank account, combing through transactions for anything unusual. Sophia had always been meticulous about finances, but now I saw things differently. A series of charges at high-end restaurants and boutique shops stood out. "Dylan?" I muttered under my breath. I printed the statements and filed them away. If Sophia was funneling money for their plans, I'd find it. The next few weeks were a masterclass in restraint. Each day, I went about my routine as though nothing had changed. Teaching classes, helping Jake with his homework, reading bedtime stories to Emily. But every night, after the kids were asleep, I pored over the footage and records I'd gathered. The recordings painted a clearer picture of Sophia's betrayal. She and Dylan were using our home, the place where we raised our children, as their meeting spot. I watched in disgust as they sat in my living room, sipping coffee and discussing their future with a casual confidence that made my stomach churn. "It's just a matter of time," Dylan said in one clip, leaning back on the couch like he owned the place. "Once you're free, we'll have everything we need." Sophia smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Ethan's too naive to see what's coming. He thinks I'll stay here forever." I paused the video, my hands trembling. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. Sophia and Dylan weren't just planning to leave. They were discussing ways to secure financial gains at my expense. "Do you think we can use the house as leverage?" Sophia asked in one recording. "Absolutely," Dylan replied. "Make him think it's for the kids. He'll agree to anything if you frame it like that." Their words stung, but they also fueled my determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my family from people who saw us as nothing more than pawns in their selfish game. I shared the evidence with Olivia Blake during one of our late-night meetings. "You're handling this better than most people would," she said, studying the files I'd brought. "I don't have a choice," I replied. "Emily and Jake deserve stability. They deserve better than this." Olivia nodded. "Keep collecting evidence. The stronger our case, the harder it will be for Sophia to argue for anything she doesn't deserve." Her words were a lifeline, reminding me that patience would pay off. The longer I watched and waited, the clearer the picture became. Sophia's actions weren't just impulsive. They were deliberate, calculated, and deeply rooted in a desire to escape the life we'd built together. It was devastating, but it also gave me clarity. By staying patient, methodical, and focused, I could protect what mattered most. As I sat in the quiet of my home one evening, watching the latest clip of Sophia and Dylan scheming, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what, I would ensure my kids and I emerged from this stronger than ever. The trap was set. Now it was just a matter of time. The email from the school board landed in my inbox like a thunderclap. Subject: Proposed budget cuts for review. I clicked it, scanning the lines until the words jumped out at me. Potential elimination of the history department due to funding realignment. My heart sank. Teaching history wasn't just a job, it was a calling. I'd spent years showing students how the past shaped the present, giving them tools to think critically about the world. The idea of losing that, to be reduced to another casualty of budget cuts, felt like a betrayal of everything I stood for. At any other time, this would have been my sole focus. But with Sophia's betrayal hanging over me, I was stretched thinner than ever. Still, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this happen. That evening, I sat at the dining room table with stacks of notes, articles, and emails spread out in front of me. Emily wandered over, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. "What are you doing, Daddy?" "Just working on something for school, sweetheart," I said, smoothing her hair. She climbed onto my lap, peering at the papers. "Are you gonna save history?" Her innocent question hit harder than she realized. "That's the plan," I said, kissing the top of her head. As she ran off to play, Sophia entered the room. She glanced at the papers, then at me, her expression unreadable. "Don't tell me you're staying up late for this," she said with a dismissive wave at my notes. "History's not exactly a priority these days." I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. "It's a priority to me." She rolled her eyes. "If you say so." Her words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into action. I met with colleagues after school, brainstorming ways to demonstrate the importance of the history department. I reached out to parents, asking them to share stories of how their kids had benefited from their history classes. Some even volunteered to speak at the upcoming school board meeting. The students were my biggest allies. Several approached me after class, offering to help however they could. "Mr. Parker, you can't let them take history away," one student said. "It's the only class where we actually learn how the world works." Their passion fueled mine, and together we built a case too compelling to ignore. The night of the school board meeting, the auditorium buzzed with tension. Teachers, parents, and students filled the seats, their whispers blending into a low hum of anticipation. When my turn came to speak, I stood at the podium, gripping the edges tightly to steady myself. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves thrumming through me. "I'm Ethan Parker, a history teacher at Westwood High, and I'm here to talk about the value of history education." I glanced at the board members, their expressions neutral but attentive. Taking a deep breath, I continued. "History isn't just about dates and events. It's about understanding the human experience, how we've grown, how we've struggled, and how we can build a better future. Cutting this department isn't just eliminating classes. It's taking away an opportunity for our students to become informed, thoughtful citizens." I shared testimonials from students and parents, projecting their words onto the screen behind me. I highlighted the department's achievements, from academic competitions to community outreach projects. As I wrapped up, I said, "If we don't teach our kids where we've been, how can we expect them to know where they're going?" The room erupted into applause. The board's decision came a week later. The history department would remain intact. Not only that, but I was offered the role of department head, a recognition of my efforts and dedication. It was a rare moment of triumph in a sea of personal turmoil, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. At home, Sophia's behavior grew more erratic. She continued to act as though nothing was wrong, but her dismissive remarks about my work and increasingly secretive phone calls didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as I helped Emily and Jake with their homework, Sophia walked into the room, scrolling through her phone. "You know," she said casually, "I heard they kept the history department because of you. Guess they couldn't let go of their golden boy." I looked up, meeting her gaze. "It wasn't just me. The students and parents made it happen." She smirked. Still, don't let it go to your head. Her words dripped with condescension, but I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I turned back to Jake's math worksheet, my resolve hardening. Each night, I continued working with Olivia Blake, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. The recordings, the financial discrepancies, the plans Sophia and Dylan had so casually discussed. All of it painted a clear picture of their betrayal. With each piece of the puzzle I uncovered, my determination grew. I had fought for my students and my passion. Now it was time to fight for my family. Sophia thought she was untouchable, that her plans would go unnoticed. But she didn't realize how much strength I had left. The professional victory reminded me of what I was capable of. And soon, I would use that same resolve to confront the chaos in my personal life. The storm wasn't over, but I was ready for it. It started with a slammed door. I was in the kitchen helping Emily with her science project when Sophia stormed in, her heels clicking against the tile floor like gunfire. Her face was flushed, and her phone was clenched tightly in her hand. "Ethan," she hissed, her voice low but sharp, "why are the accounts frozen?" I glanced at Emily, whose wide eyes darted between us. "Emily, sweetie, why don't you go check on Jake? I think he's in the living room." She hesitated but nodded, gathering her materials and scurrying out of the room. Once we were alone, I turned to Sophia, keeping my tone calm. I froze them because I needed to ensure that our finances were protected. "Protected?" she snapped. "From what?" "From you," I replied, my voice steady. Her eyes narrowed, the initial shock replaced by thinly veiled defiance. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Ethan, but this is a serious overstep." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached into the folder I'd prepared and pulled out a USB drive, placing it on the counter between us. "What's this?" she demanded, though her voice faltered slightly. "Proof," I said simply. I could see the cracks forming in her composure as I began laying out the evidence. The first blow came in the form of financial documents, records of her secret spending, charges that couldn't be explained away as ordinary household expenses. The second was video evidence. Clips of her and Dylan meeting in our home, sitting on our couch, and discussing plans to secure money from me after the divorce. Sophia's face drained of color, but she quickly recovered, straightening her spine. "This is illegal," she said, pointing to the USB. "You're spying on me in my own home?" "It's our home," I corrected, "and I did what I had to do to protect Emily, Jake, and myself." She leaned forward, her tone turning venomous. "You think this changes anything? You're still just a boring little history teacher. Dylan and you are done," I interrupted, cutting her off. "He's using you, Sophia, just like you were using me. But the difference is, I have the evidence to back it up." Her defiance wavered. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "This won't hold up in court," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "That's not for you to decide," I replied. "We'll let the judge make that call." The divorce proceedings began a week later. With Olivia Blake by my side, I felt as prepared as I could be. She presented our case methodically, dismantling Sophia's arguments piece by piece. Sophia tried to paint me as an unfit husband, claiming I was controlling, inattentive, and too consumed by my work to support our family. But Olivia countered every accusation with precision, using the video recordings, financial records, and even testimonies from friends and colleagues to reveal the truth. The footage of Sophia and Dylan plotting against me was the final nail in her defense. "Your Honor," Olivia said, addressing the judge, "this is not a case of irreconcilable differences. This is a case of calculated betrayal." When the ruling came, it was as if a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying was finally lifted. The court granted me full custody of Emily and Jake, citing Sophia's actions as evidence of her inability to prioritize their well-being. She was ordered to contribute financially to their care, though I doubted she'd ever do so willingly. Sophia didn't look at me as the judge read the decision. Her expression was blank, her shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, I felt a pang of something Pity, maybe, but it passed quickly. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The victory was bittersweet. I had protected my children, secured our home, and exposed the truth. But the life I thought I'd built with Sophia was gone, reduced to ashes by her lies. That evening, after tucking Emily and Jake into bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the folder of evidence one last time. Then, with a deep breath, I fed the papers into the shredder and deleted the files from my laptop. The battle was over, but the journey wasn't. As I prepared for the road ahead, one thought kept me grounded. I had done what was necessary to protect my family, and now it was time to rebuild, not just for myself but for Emily and Jake. This was the end of one chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new. Life after the divorce settled into a rhythm, albeit one I hadn't expected. The house felt quieter, not just because Sophia was gone, but because the tension that had permeated our lives was finally lifted. Emily and Jake adapted quickly, quicker than I had, to be honest. Their resilience was humbling, and I poured everything I had into maintaining that stability. "Dad, can we have pancakes for dinner?" Emily asked one evening, her eyes lighting up at the idea. "Only if you help me flip them," I replied, ruffling her hair. Jake chimed in. "I'm in charge of syrup." Little moments like these became our anchors. Pancake dinners, family movie nights, and Sunday trips to the park filled the spaces where conflict once resided. Outside our home, things were more complicated. Whispers about the divorce spread quickly in our small community. Some people offered quiet words of support, while others couldn't seem to resist the urge to pry. "Ethan," Mrs. Linton from down the street said one morning as I watered the garden, "I hope you're holding up okay. Divorce is so trying." Her tone was more curiosity than concern, and I forced a polite smile. "We're doing just fine, Mrs. Linton. Thanks for asking." The unspoken questions hung in the air, but I didn't know anyone answers. One afternoon, the doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Rachel Moore, Sophia's sister, standing on the porch. Her face was drawn, her hands twisting nervously. "Ethan," she began, her voice hesitant. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. Rachel and I had always been civil but not particularly close. Sophia had a way of controlling the narrative in her family, and I suspected Rachel had taken her side during the divorce. "I owe you an apology," she said once we were seated in the living room. I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For believing Sophia," she admitted. "She told me things about you, things that I see now weren't true. I should have reached out sooner, but I didn't know how." Her sincerity caught me off guard. I leaned back, studying her. "What changed?" Rachel hesitated, then sighed. "I saw the toll it took on Emily and Jake, and when I tried to talk to Sophia about it, she brushed me off. She's not the person I thought she was." For a moment we sat in silence. Then I nodded. "I appreciate you coming here, Rachel. It means a lot." Her relief was palpable, and as she left, I felt a weight lift. The fracture between our families might never fully heal, but this was a start. At work, things were moving in the opposite direction. Upward. My innovative teaching methods, which emphasize storytelling and interactive projects, were gaining recognition beyond our school. A local education journal published an article about our history program, and I was invited to present at a regional conference. "I read your article, Mr. Parker," one of my students said excitedly after class one day. "Are you famous now?" I laughed. "Not quite, but I'm glad you liked it." Their enthusiasm reminded me why I loved teaching. History wasn't just a subject. It was a way to help students understand the world and their place in it. Beyond my classroom, I found a new purpose. The divorce had been isolating at times, but it also opened my eyes to how many others were facing similar struggles. I started a support group for men who had experienced betrayal or difficult divorces, offering them a space to share their stories without judgment. The first meeting was small, just 3 of us in the community center's back room. But as word spread, the group grew. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to talk about this," one man admitted during a session. "But hearing you guys, It makes me feel less alone. His words struck a chord. That was exactly why I'd started the group. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. Life wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about rebuilding, not just for myself but for Emily and Jake, for my students, and for the men in the support group who were finding their way forward. One evening, as the kids and I played a board game in the living room, Jake looked up at me and said, "You're the best dad ever." I smiled, pulling him into a hug. "And you're the best kids ever." There were still challenges ahead. I knew that. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them. Together, we were building something stronger than what had been lost. And that, I realized, was the most important victory of all. History has a way of showing us the patterns in life, the cycles of triumph, tragedy, and resilience. I'd spent years teaching my students about the rise and fall of empires, revolutions, and the lessons they left behind. But standing in front of my class one Tuesday morning, I realized those lessons weren't just academic. They were deeply personal. I erased the whiteboard, leaving only the words, "What can we learn from loss?" "Anyone?" I asked, turning to face the room. A hand shot up. It belonged to Clara, one of my most thoughtful students. "That it makes us stronger?" I nodded. "Exactly. Loss forces us to adapt, to grow. It teaches us who we are and what we're capable of." As the discussion continued, I saw something in their faces, a spark of understanding that went beyond grades or tests. It was the same spark I'd felt in myself over the past year. Outside the classroom, I began writing. At first, it was just a way to process everything, the betrayal, the divorce, the challenges of rebuilding. But as I filled page after page, it became something more. My writing wove together stories from my life and lessons from history, drawing parallels between personal resilience and the broader human experience. I shared drafts with friends and colleagues, and their feedback was encouraging. "This is powerful stuff, Ethan," my colleague Sarah said after reading an early chapter. "You have to share this with more people." One day, after I posted an excerpt online, I received an email from Emily Carter, a publishing agent. "Your writing moved me," her message began. "I'd love to discuss the possibility of turning your story into a book." At first, I was skeptical. Me? Write a book? But after a long phone call with Emily, I began to see the potential. "This isn't just about you," she said. "Your story will resonate with anyone who's faced hardship and come out stronger. It's a blueprint for resilience." That word, resilience, stuck with me. As I worked on the manuscript, life continued to unfold in surprising ways. The support group I'd started grew larger than I'd ever anticipated. What began as a small circle of men sharing their struggles had become a network of people from all walks of life, united by the desire to heal and grow. We held workshops, invited guest speakers, and even organized a charity event to fund mental health resources for the community. Each meeting reminded me of the power of connection and the strength we find in shared experiences. Sophia reached out occasionally, her tone shifting between remorseful and defensive. "I made mistakes," she admitted during one call. "But I'm still their mother, Ethan. We should be working together, not against each other." Her words might have swayed me once, but not anymore. "Our focus should be on what's best for Emily and Jake," I replied calmly. "And right now, that means consistency and stability." She tried to plead her case, but I stayed firm. Moving on wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about ensuring my kids had the life they deserved. In the midst of everything, I found joy in the small victories. Watching Emily nail her school play performance, helping Jake perfect his jump shot, or seeing a struggling student light up after grasping a difficult concept. Each moment felt like a testament to the life I was building. And as the pages of my book took shape, I realized that my story wasn't just about overcoming betrayal. It was about finding strength, purpose, and joy in the aftermath. The day Emily Carter called to tell me the book deal was finalized, I felt a rush of pride. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Your story is going to inspire so many people." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, letting it sink in. The Ethan who had sat by the pond that fateful day, reeling from Sophia's betrayal, felt like a distant memory. Now, I was defined not by what had happened to me, but by how I had chosen to rise above it. In the months that followed, new opportunities emerged, speaking engagements, interviews, and collaborations. But through it all, my focus remained on the things that mattered most. My kids, my students, and the community we'd built together. One evening, as I tucked Emily and Jake into bed, Emily looked up at me and said, "Dad, you're the strongest person I know." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "I'm strong because of you too," I said softly. My life wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would always be there. But they didn't define me anymore. Each day was a chance to build something better, to turn pain into power, and to show Emily and Jake that resilience wasn't just something we talked about in history class. It was something we lived. The buzz of conversation filled the classroom as my students settled into their seats. The day's lesson was about resilience, not just as a concept, but as a force that shaped history and, I hoped, their lives. I stood at the whiteboard, writing the names of historical figures: Harriet Tubman, Nelson Mandela, Malala Yousafzai. Each name represented a story of triumph over adversity, of turning challenges into stepping stones. What do these people have in common? I asked, turning to face the room. Clara raised her hand. They all went through something really hard but didn't give up? Exactly, I said, smiling. Resilience isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about facing them head-on and coming out stronger on the other side. As the discussion unfolded, I couldn't help but draw silent parallels to my own life. Each story reminded me of the lessons I'd learned, the strength I'd found, and the journey that had brought me here. After class, I sat at my desk, reviewing notes for the next day's lesson. The familiar tap of sneakers on tile pulled my attention, and I looked up to see James, one of my quieter students, standing hesitantly by the door. "Hey, James," I said. "What's up?" "I just wanted to say thanks," he mumbled, "for today's lesson. It helped me." His words took me by surprise, but I kept my tone gentle.
I'm glad, James.
Remember, challenges don't define you. It's how you face them that matters. He nodded, offering a shy smile before leaving. Moments like that reminded me why I loved teaching. Later that afternoon, I met with Emily Carter at a downtown cafe. The manuscript for my book had gone through its final revisions, and the release date was fast approaching. Emily's enthusiasm was infectious as she laid out plans for the launch. "This book is going to resonate with so many people," she said, sipping her coffee. "It's raw, honest, and hopeful. That's exactly what people need right now." Her words filled me with both pride and anticipation. Sharing my story wasn't just about closure. It was about creating a guide for others navigating the storms of life. When I started writing, I didn't think it would go beyond my journal, I admitted. Now, it feels like a mission. Emily smiled. "It is, and it's just getting started." As I drove home that evening, Emily and Jake's laughter echoed from the back seat. We'd stopped for ice cream on the way, and Jake was gleefully recounting how he'd managed to spill half of his cone onto his sister's shoes. "Jake, you're so gross." Emily groaned, though she was laughing too. "Am not," Jake shot back, grinning. Their banter brought a warmth to my heart that words couldn't capture. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, their faces lit by the golden glow of the setting sun. The road ahead still held uncertainties, I knew that. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Pulling into the driveway, I saw the familiar outline of our cozy home. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. A place filled with laughter, love, and hope. As we stepped inside, Jake raced to the living room, shouting something about building the ultimate pillow fort. Emily rolled her eyes but followed him, a smile tugging at her lips. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The weight of the past had lessened, replaced by a quiet confidence in the future we were building. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the cool night air brushing against my face. The stars above were steady and unchanging, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could still be found. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned years ago, but it was better in ways I couldn't have imagined. I turned pain into power, adversity into growth, and uncertainty into hope. This was my new chapter. And as I sat there, I knew it was only the beginning.